I retired, all I knew was defending my end zone.
I didn't know what to do. I always had my guard up.
Ready to tear someone's head off.
Then I stopped settling for safe-ish and got safe with ADT.
With 24/7 monitoring,
What's up, Brian?
I'm more relaxed than ever.
And I don't have my head on the swivel anymore. Oh, a black cat chickadee.
I had a whole defensive scheme to keep it safe-ish. Woo!
And safe-ish wasn't good enough. Oh, hey.
Hey, Bam Bam!
What's going on?
Because now when it comes to protecting my house, I use ADT. Coming through! No, not in my house!
Oh, a cat.
Every time his wife went out for one of her girls' nights, the pattern was the same. She would kiss him on the cheek, promise she'd be back late, and the moment she stepped outside, his phone would go silent. Not because she was busy, because she blocked him. Calls went straight to voicemail. Messages stopped delivering. At first he told himself it was her way of avoiding arguments, her way of having peace. But after the third time, it stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like a curtain being pulled. My name is Dan Miller, and I've been fixing cars for 22 years. I own Miller's Auto Body on the south side of Lakewood, a town that peaked in the 80s and has been sliding downhill ever since. I'm good with my hands, better with engines than I am with people. And I thought I understood my wife, Rachel, after 15 years of marriage. Turns out, I didn't understand Jack. That Friday started like any other. Rachel came downstairs in a black dress I'd never seen before, her makeup perfect, heels clicking on our kitchen tiles like gunshots. She worked in HR at Consolidated Logistics, made more money than me, and lately seemed to enjoy reminding me of that fact. Girls' night again? I asked, not looking up from my coffee. The newspaper was spread in front of me, but I wasn't reading it. I was counting. This would be the 4th Friday in 6 weeks. Just Kelly and the girls from work, she said, checking her reflection in the microwave door. You know how it is. We need to decompress. I knew Kelly Simmons, Rachel's best friend since college, worked in the same department, lived alone in a condo downtown. Kelly had always been polite to me, but there was something in her eyes when she looked at Rachel that made me uncomfortable. Like she was seeing something I wasn't supposed to notice. What time will you be back? I asked. Rachel's hand paused on her purse strap. Late. Don't wait up. She kissed my cheek, the same perfunctory peck she'd been giving me for months, and walked out. I watched through the kitchen window as she got into her silver Honda Accord and backed out of our driveway. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was watering her roses and gave Rachel a wave. Rachel waved back, all smiles. I waited exactly 3 minutes, then picked up my phone and called her, straight to voicemail. I sent a text, "Drive safe, love you." The message showed as delivered for about 30 seconds. Then, the status disappeared. Not delivered. Blocked. My hands started shaking and I set the phone down harder than I meant to. The coffee mug rattled against the table. This was the pattern. Every girls' night, the same routine. Kiss, leave, block, disappear. And every time, I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Rachel valued her space. She didn't want me checking up on her. She was entitled to privacy. But sitting there in my empty kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick, I realized I was tired of making excuses for my own wife. I opened my phone and navigated to the family location sharing app we'd set up 2 years ago. For safety, Rachel had said when she suggested it, in case something happens to one of us. Our kids, Ellie and Max, were both there on the map. Ellie at her friend's house, Max at baseball practice. And there was Rachel's Dot, moving through downtown Lakewood. I watched it for 10 minutes, expecting to see her arrive at Kelly's condo or one of the usual bars where the work crowd hung out. Instead, her Dot came to a stop at the Lakeview Inn, a mid-tier hotel on the other side of town, the kind of place business travelers stayed when they couldn't expense the Marriott. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step going downstairs. I stared at the screen, willing the Dot to move. Maybe she was picking someone up. Maybe Kelly was staying there for some reason. Maybe there was a work event I didn't know about. The Dot stayed perfectly still, like it belonged there. I grabbed my keys. The drive to the Lakeview Inn took 15 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I kept checking my phone at red lights, hoping Rachel's dot would move somewhere that made sense. It didn't. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I found a spot with a clear view of the main entrance and settled in to wait. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but I knew I had to see it. After months of blocked calls and vague explanations, I needed proof that I was either crazy or justified. 20 minutes later, the hotel's glass doors opened and my wife stepped out. She wasn't alone. The man walking beside my wife was Greg Marsh, my boss at the dealership where I worked part-time doing warranty repairs. Greg was 52, divorced, drove a BMW, and wore suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. He owned 3 car lots in the county and had the kind of confidence that came from never having to fix anything with his own hands. They walked too close together, too familiar. Rachel was laughing at something he'd said, her hand briefly touching his arm. When they reached her car, Greg didn't just say goodbye. He pulled her close and kissed her. Not on the cheek, on the mouth. Long enough that I had time to fumble for my phone and take a picture through my windshield. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I watched Greg walk to his BMW and Rachel get into her Honda. They didn't drive off together. Greg went left toward the expensive part of town. Rachel went right toward downtown, probably to establish an alibi with Kelly. I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes, staring at the photo on my phone. My wife of 15 years, kissing my boss outside a hotel. The same boss who'd been giving me the worst repair jobs lately. The ones that paid the least and took the longest. The same boss who'd made jokes about keeping the help happy whenever I was around. I drove home in a daze, my mind cycling through every interaction I'd had with Greg in the past few months. Every time he'd asked about Rachel, every time he'd mentioned seeing her at some work function I hadn't been invited to, every condescending smile when he handed me another transmission job that would take all week and pay for half of one. When I got home, I went straight to my laptop and opened a new browser window. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I started with our joint credit card statements. Rachel handled most of our finances. She was better with numbers, she said. I'd been happy to let her. Going through 3 months of statements, I found charges I didn't recognize. Restaurants I'd never been to, a jewelry store purchase for $400, a charge at Victoria's Secret for $230. When I checked the dates, they all fell on or around Rachel's girls' nights. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Having so much fun. Kelly says hi. Don't wait up XOXO. I stared at that message for a long time. The casual lie of it, the ease with which she could sit in some bar with Kelly, probably laughing about how clueless her husband was, while the taste of another man was still on her lips. I called my lawyer. Jim Hendricks had handled my business paperwork when I opened the shop. He was a straight shooter, didn't sugarcoat anything, and had been divorced twice himself. When I told him I needed to see him immediately, he didn't ask questions, just told me to come over. Jim lived in a converted carriage house behind his office downtown. When I showed him the photo and the credit card statements, he poured 2 glasses of bourbon and sat back in his leather chair. How long has this been going on? He asked. I don't know. Months, maybe longer. She's been blocking me every time she goes out. Any idea who the guy is? My boss, Greg Marsh, owns Marsh Motors. Jim whistled low. That's a complication. You work for him? Part-time. Most of my income comes from the shop, but the dealership work helps during slow months. Well, that's about to end. Jim pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Tell me about your assets. House, business, savings, retirement accounts. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. The house was in both our names. The shop was mine, but Rachel had co-signed the business loan. We had about $30,000 in savings, most of it from my work. Rachel's 401k was substantial. She'd been climbing the corporate ladder, while I'd been content to fix cars and come home dirty. The good news is, you've got documentation of the affair, Jim said. Indiana's a no-fault state. But adultery can still affect asset division, especially if she spent marital assets on the relationship. What do you recommend? Get more evidence. Document everything. And whatever you do, don't confront her until we're ready to file. Once she knows you know, she'll start hiding assets and building her own case. I drove home with a folder full of paperwork and a head full of strategy. When I walked into my kitchen, Rachel was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, still in her black dress. "How was girls' night?" I asked. She smiled, the same smile she'd given Mrs. Patterson hours earlier. "Good. Kelly's thinking about buying a new car. I told her you might be able to help her find something reliable." The casual way she lied to my face was almost impressive. I sat down across from her and nodded. "Sure, I know a guy." We sat there in our kitchen, my wife and I, making small talk about her friend's imaginary car purchase, while the photo of her kissing my boss burned like acid in my phone. "I'm tired," she said finally. "Long day." She kissed my forehead, another perfunctory gesture, and went upstairs. I heard the shower turn on and wondered if she was washing off Greg's cologne. I stayed at the kitchen table until after midnight, reading through the divorce paperwork Jim had given me. Petition for dissolution of marriage, asset division worksheet, child custody agreement, 15 years of marriage reduced to forms and filing fees. The next morning, Rachel was gone before I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Went shopping with Kelly. Back this afternoon. Love you." More lies, delivered with a smiley face drawn in the margin. I called the shop and told my assistant Tommy I'd be in late, then drove to Kelly's condo downtown. Rachel's Honda was in the visitor parking lot. I sat across the street and waited. At 11:30, they came out together. Rachel was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen at home in months. Kelly was animated, gesturing as she talked, and Rachel was laughing, real laughter, not the polite chuckles she'd been giving me lately. I followed them to the mall, staying far enough back to avoid being seen. They went into department stores, tried on clothes, shared lunch at the food court like teenagers. Watching them, I realized something that hit me harder than discovering the affair. Rachel was happy, genuinely, completely happy, in a way she hadn't been with me in years. They spent 3 hours shopping. Rachel bought clothes, makeup, perfume, things she'd wear for Greg probably. When they finally separated in the parking lot, Kelly hugged Rachel longer than friends usually did. There was something intimate about it, something that made me wonder if Greg was the only secret Rachel was keeping. I went to the shop and tried to lose myself in work. I had a transmission rebuild that needed finishing and 2 insurance estimates to write up. But every time I looked at my hands, I saw them shaking. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Tommy noticed. "You okay, boss? You look like hell." Tommy Kowalski was 26, built like a linebacker, and had been working for me for 3 years. He was good with engines and better with people, the kind of guy who could talk a customer into a major repair without making them feel cheated. He also had a mouth like a sailor and no filter whatsoever. "Just tired," I said. "Rachel keeping you up?" He grinned. "Lucky bastard." I wanted to tell him. The words were right there, begging to come out. Instead, I handed him the transmission case and went to my office to call Jim. "I need to know how to document everything," I said. "Phone records, credit cards, hotel receipts, all of it." "Slow down," Jim said. "And what happened?" I told him about following Rachel and Kelly, about the shopping trip, about the way my wife looked happier with her friend than she'd been with me in months. "You think there's something going on with the friend, too?" "I don't know. Maybe. Does it matter?" "Could help with custody if we can prove she's been living a double life. But Dan, you need to be careful. Don't do anything that could be construed as stalking or harassment. Document from a distance." That evening, Rachel came home with shopping bags and a story about finding great sales. She modeled some of the clothes for me, asking my opinion with the kind of enthusiasm she used to show when we were dating. It was a performance, I realized. She was playing the part of a happy wife while planning her exit. "You look beautiful," I said, because that's what the script called for. "Thank you." She kissed my cheek. "I'm going to call Kelly and thank her for today." She went upstairs with her phone. I could hear her voice through the ceiling, animated and affectionate. When she came back down an hour later, she was glowing. "Kelly invited us to dinner next weekend," she said. "Both of us. She's making that pasta dish you like." Another performance, another lie wrapped in normal life. "Sounds great," I said. That night, I lay awake listening to Rachel breathe beside me and wondered how long she'd been planning this. How long she'd been looking at me across the breakfast table and seeing an obstacle instead of a husband. How many girls' nights had actually been hotel nights? My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Your wife's car was at the Lakeview Inn again tonight. Thought you should know. My blood went cold. Someone else knew. Someone was watching. I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to call the number. It went straight to voicemail. Generic recording, no name. I texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "A friend. Check the hotel bar tomorrow at 6 p.m. Come alone." I deleted the messages and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered who else knew my business. In a town like Lakewood, secrets didn't stay buried long. Someone had seen Rachel and Greg together and decided I deserved to know. The question was, what did they want in return? The next evening, I told Rachel I had to work late on an insurance job. She barely looked up from her laptop. "Okay, I'll probably be in bed when you get home. Long day tomorrow. Another girls' night, probably. Another hotel room, another lie. The Lakeview Inn's bar was exactly what you'd expect from a mid-tier hotel. Dim lighting, generic jazz music, businessmen drinking alone while staring at their phones." I ordered a beer and waited. At 6:15, a woman slid into the booth across from me. She was maybe 40, blonde, wearing a nurse's uniform with a hospital ID badge. I'd never seen her before. "You're Dan Miller," she said. It wasn't a question. "And you are?" "Someone who's been watching your wife make a fool of you for 3 months." She signaled the waitress for a drink. "My name's Susan. I work at the hospital. I come here sometimes after my shift." "Why tell me?" Susan's drink arrived. Vodka tonic. She took a long sip before answering. "Because I hate cheaters. My ex-husband pulled the same crap your wife's pulling. The lies, the blocking, the fake girls' nights. I know what it looks like." "What exactly have you seen?" "Your wife and that older guy, the one with the BMW. They've been meeting here every Friday for months. Always the same routine. She arrives first, he shows up 20 minutes later, they have a drink, then they go upstairs. Room 237, he pays cash." My stomach clenched. "How do you know the room number?" "Because I asked. Told the desk clerk I thought I saw my cousin's husband cheating and wanted to be sure before I said anything. Slipped him $50. Susan leaned forward. "They're not careful, Dan. They act like they own the place." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken. "This is them? That's them. Every Friday like clockwork. Why should I trust you? I don't even know you." Susan reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital camera. She scrolled through several photos. Rachel and Greg entering the hotel, leaving the hotel, kissing in the parking lot. The timestamps showed different dates going back months. "I started taking pictures after the third time I saw them," she said. "Call it insurance. I've been cheated on, and I know how hard it is to prove when they're being sneaky about it." "What do you want?" "Nothing. I just think you deserve to know what your wife's really doing on her girls' nights." Susan finished her drink and stood up. "There's something else. The blonde woman who works with your wife? Kelly? She was here last Friday, too. Sat at the bar while your wife was upstairs, like she was standing guard." My blood ran cold. Standing guard? That's what it looked like. She kept checking her phone, watching the elevators. When your wife came down, Kelly left first. Your wife waited 10 minutes, then followed. Susan handed me a flash drive. "Oh, those photos are on there, plus a few more I took tonight. Your wife's upstairs right now, by the way. Room 237. Arrived about an hour ago." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone with a flash drive full of evidence and the knowledge that my wife was 50 feet above my head, in bed with my boss. I sat there for another hour, drinking beer and watching the elevators. At 8:30, Greg came down alone, straightened his tie, and walked out to his BMW like he owned the world. 20 minutes later, Rachel appeared, checked her reflection in the lobby mirror, and drove away to establish her alibi. I went home and plugged in the flash drive. Dozens of photos, all time-stamped, showing the progression of Rachel and Greg's affair. In the early photos, they looked nervous, checking over their shoulders. In the recent ones, they looked comfortable, familiar. Like a couple. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Kelly and I decided to catch a late movie. Don't wait up." I looked at the timestamp on Susan's most recent photo. 7:42 p.m. Rachel entering the hotel. The lies were so casual now, so effortless. Rachel had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look me in the eye and lie without flinching. I called Jim and told him about the meeting, about Susan's photos, about the room number and the cash payments. "This is good," he said. Very good. We can subpoena hotel records, credit card statements, phone records. With this level of documentation, we can prove adultery and misuse of marital assets. What's the next step? We file, soon, before she figures out what you know. And my job? You'll lose it, no question. But Dan, you were going to lose it anyway. Guys like Greg don't keep the cuckolded husband around once the affair goes public. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with Susan's photos spread across the table like evidence in a murder case. In a way, that's what they were. Evidence of the murder of my marriage, documented in digital timestamps and hotel receipts. Rachel came home at midnight, smelling like hotel soap and cheap wine. She kissed my forehead and went upstairs, humming a song I didn't recognize. I stayed downstairs until dawn, planning my next move. The following Friday, I decided to break the pattern. Instead of waiting at home while Rachel went to her girls' night, I was going to be waiting at the hotel when she arrived. I called in sick to the dealership, told Tommy to handle the shop, and drove to the Lakeview Inn at 5 o'clock. I got the same booth Susan had used, ordered a beer, and waited. Rachel arrived at 6:10 wearing a red dress I'd never seen before. She looked around the bar nervously before taking a seat near the window. She ordered wine and kept checking her phone. Greg showed up at 6:30, exactly on schedule. He spotted Rachel immediately and walked over with the confidence of a man who'd never been caught at anything. They kissed, not passionately, but familiarly, like a married couple meeting after work. I watched them have drinks and make conversation. Rachel laughed at Greg's jokes, touched his hand when she talked. She looked relaxed and happy, the way she used to look with me. After an hour, they got up and walked toward the elevators. That's when I made my move. I intercepted them at the elevator bank, stepping out from behind a pillar like something from a bad movie. "Hey, honey," I said to Rachel. "Funny running into you here." Rachel's face went white. Greg stepped back like I'd pulled a gun. "Dan," Rachel stammered, "what are you doing here?" "Having a drink." "What are you doing here?" "I thought tonight was girls' night with Kelly." The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding. The doors opened to reveal an elderly couple who took one look at our little tableau and decided to wait for the next car. "We were just," Rachel started. "Just what?" I looked at Greg, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper. "Hey, Greg, fancy seeing you here. Small world." "Dan, I can explain," Rachel said. "I'm sure you can. You've gotten pretty good at explaining things lately." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken a week earlier. "Want to explain this?" Rachel looked at the photo and her shoulders sagged. The fight went out of her all at once, like air leaving a punctured tire. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough. The question is, how long has this been going on?" Greg finally found his voice. "Dan, let's all calm down here. We can work this out like adults." I turned to him slowly. "Work what out exactly? The fact that you've been screwing my wife? The fact that you've been giving me the worst jobs at the dealership while you wine and dine her with my money?" "Your money?" Greg's confidence was returning. "Last I checked, Rachel has her own job, her own income. What she does with it is her business." I pulled out my phone again and showed him the credit card statements. "Joint account, Greg. Marital assets. Every dinner, every hotel room, every piece of jewelry you bought her. That's theft." The hotel lobby was starting to attract attention. Other guests were staring, and I could see the desk clerk reaching for the phone. "We should take this somewhere private," Rachel said. "No," I said. "We're done taking things private. I'm done being the clueless husband who doesn't know what his wife does on Friday nights." I looked at Greg. "You're fired, by the way. Don't bother coming in Monday," Greg laughed. "I think you've got that backwards, Dan. You work for me, remember?" "Not anymore. See, I've got photos, credit card records, hotel receipts. I've got enough evidence to prove you've been using company resources to conduct an affair with an employee's spouse. I'm betting your business insurance doesn't cover that kind of liability." The color drained from Greg's face. He was starting to understand that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "Dan, please," Rachel said. "Can we go home and talk about this?" Talk about what? About how you've been lying to me for months? About how you block my calls so you can screw my boss in hotel rooms? About how you and Kelly have been planning this whole thing? Rachel's eyes widened. Kelly has nothing to do with this. Really? Because I've got witnesses who say she's been playing lookout while you're upstairs. I've got photos of her sitting in this bar, watching the elevators like a security guard. That was a lie, but Rachel's reaction told me I was close to the truth. She looked panicked, trapped. The hotel security guard was walking toward us now, a big guy in a cheap suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Folks, I'm going to have to ask you to take this outside, and he said. We're leaving, I said. I looked at Rachel. You can ride home with me or you can ride home with Greg. But either way, we're having a conversation tonight. Rachel chose me. Greg slipped away like the coward he was, probably already planning how to spin this to his advantage. The drive home was silent. Rachel stared out the passenger window while I gripped the steering wheel and tried not to think about how many times she'd made the same drive after leaving Greg's bed. When we got to the house, I went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of wine. Rachel sat at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped our kids with homework, where we'd planned our future together. How long? I asked. 4 months, she said quietly. Why? Rachel was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was lonely. Because you work all the time, and when you come home, you're tired and dirty, and you don't want to talk. Because Greg makes me feel interesting and attractive and valued. So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it. I didn't plan it. It just happened. Bullshit. Affairs don't just happen. You made choices. You chose to lie to me. You chose to block my calls. You chose to spend our money on hotel rooms and jewelry for your boyfriend. Rachel started crying. I know it was wrong. But Dan, we've been growing apart for years. You have to admit that. She was right, and that made it worse. We had been growing apart. I'd been working more, coming home tired, taking her for granted. But instead of fighting for our marriage, she'd found someone else. What about Kelly? I asked. Rachel's tears stopped. What about her? Is she just your friend, or is there something else going on? I don't know what you mean. I think you do. I think Kelly's been more than a friend for a while now. I think she's been helping you plan this whole thing because she wants you for herself. Rachel's silence was answer enough. Jesus Christ, I said. How many people are you sleeping with? It's not like that, Rachel said quickly. Kelly and I, it's complicated. Complicated how? We've been friends for so long, and after things started going bad with us, she was there for me. She listened. She understood. And one thing led to another. Rachel nodded miserably. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this new information. My wife wasn't just having an affair with my boss. She was having affairs with my boss and her best friend. Possibly at the same time. So what now? I asked. I don't know. I love you, Dan. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, and now we have to deal with it. I pulled out the divorce papers Jim had prepared and set them on the table between us. I've already filed, I said. You'll be served on Monday. Rachel stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You don't want to try to work this out? With who? You? Greg? Kelly? I don't even know who I'm married to anymore. Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. I'm still me, Dan. I made mistakes, but I'm still the woman you married. I looked at her hand on mine, at the wedding ring she'd been wearing while she kissed other people, and felt nothing but sadness. No, I said, you're not. The next week was a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and uncomfortable conversations. Rachel moved in with Kelly temporarily, which confirmed my suspicions about their relationship. Greg fired me from the dealership, exactly as Jim had predicted, but not before I'd made copies of every company document that might be relevant to my case. The kids took the news about as well as you'd expect. Ellie, our 17-year-old, blamed me for not fighting harder to save the marriage. Max, 15, just got quiet and spent most of his time at friends' houses. You could have tried counseling, Ellie said during one of our kitchen table conversations. Mom said she wanted to try counseling. When did she say that? I asked. Last week. She said she begged you to go to counseling, but you refused. Another lie. Rachel was already rewriting history, making herself the victim and me, the stubborn husband, who wouldn't fight for his marriage. Ellie, your mother has been lying to all of us for months. She's been having an affair with my boss and spending our money on hotel rooms. When exactly was she planning to suggest counseling? Ellie crossed her arms. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to her, she wouldn't have needed to find someone else. The words hit like a slap. My own daughter was taking her mother's side, buying into the narrative that I was somehow responsible for Rachel's choices. Max was different. He didn't say much, but he watched everything. One evening, he came into the garage where I was working on a customer's car. "Dad, are you okay?" I looked up from the engine I was rebuilding. "I'm fine, son. Why?" "You seem angry all the time." He was right. I was angry. Angry at Rachel for lying. Angry at Greg for taking advantage. Angry at Kelly for manipulating the situation. Angry at myself for not seeing it coming. "I'm not angry at you or your sister," I said. "I'm angry at the situation. Is it true about Mom and her boss?" I stopped working and really looked at my son. He was growing up fast, getting tall and lean like I'd been at his age. He deserved the truth. "Yes, it's true." "That sucks." "Yeah, it does." "Are you going to be okay?" "I think so. We both are. It's going to be different, but we'll figure it out." Max nodded and went back to the house. That night, I heard him on the phone with one of his friends, explaining that his parents were getting divorced. He sounded older than 15. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings were moving forward. Jim had filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and requested full documentation of Rachel's affairs. We subpoenaed hotel records, credit card statements, and phone records. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel's lawyer was trying to paint her as a victim of an emotionally distant husband, but the hotel receipts and jewelry purchases made that argument difficult to sustain. "She's going to try to claim emotional abandonment," Jim told me during one of our meetings. Standard playbook for cheating spouses. But the financial evidence is too strong. She spent marital assets on her affairs, and that's going to cost her. What about custody? That's trickier. Courts don't like to punish parents for adultery when it comes to custody. But the fact that she's been living a double life, lying to the kids, spending money on affairs, that all factors in. The worst part was how quickly our social circle chose sides. Rachel and Kelly had been popular in our neighborhood, and their version of events was spreading faster than mine. I was the controlling husband who'd driven his wife away. Rachel was the victim who'd found comfort in the arms of a sympathetic friend. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, stopped waving when I pulled into my driveway. The guys at the coffee shop downtown got quiet when I walked in. Even some of my customers started taking their business elsewhere. "Small-town politics," Tommy said when I mentioned it. "Give it time. Truth has a way of coming out." But I wasn't sure I had time. My business was suffering, my kids were confused, and my soon-to-be ex-wife was painting me as the villain in her story. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. If Rachel wanted to make this a public battle, I was going to give her one she'd never forget. I started with Greg. As the owner of 3 car dealerships, he had a reputation to maintain in the community. He was on the Chamber of Commerce, sponsored Little League teams, and ran ads on local radio that featured his family values. I called the local newspaper and told them I had a story about business ethics and community leadership. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, met me at a coffee shop downtown. I have documentation of a prominent local businessman conducting affairs with employees' spouses and using company resources to facilitate those affairs, I said. Jennifer's eyes lit up. "Can you prove it?" I showed her the hotel receipts, the credit card statements, and the photos Susan had given me. I explained how Greg had been giving me the worst jobs while conducting an affair with my wife, how he'd used company credit cards for their dinners, how he'd fired me when I discovered the affair. "This is Greg Marsh we're talking about?" Jennifer asked. "That's right. The same Greg Marsh who runs those family values commercials." "Can I quote you on the record?" "Absolutely." The story ran 3 days later on the front page of the local section. Local dealer accused of using business to facilitate affair. It included quotes from me, copies of receipts, and a photo of Greg and Rachel entering the hotel. Greg's response was swift and predictable. He denied everything, claimed the photos were taken out of context, and threatened to sue the newspaper for libel. But the damage was done. The story was picked up by the regional papers, and within a week, Greg was facing calls for his resignation from the Chamber of Commerce. His wife filed for divorce. 2 of his major customers canceled their fleet contracts. His carefully constructed image as a family man and community leader was in ruins. But I wasn't done. Next, I turned my attention to Kelly. As an HR manager at Consolidated Logistics, she had access to confidential employee information and company resources. I suspected she'd been using both to help facilitate Rachel's affair. I called the company's ethics hotline and reported that an HR employee was involved in facilitating workplace affairs and potentially violating confidentiality policies. I provided documentation showing Kelly's involvement in covering for Rachel's absences and her presence at the hotel during the affair. The investigation was swift. Companies don't mess around when it comes to HR violations, especially ones that could expose them to liability. Kelly was suspended pending investigation, then quietly fired 2 weeks later. Rachel was collateral damage. As the other party in the affair, and as someone who'd been lying about her whereabouts during work hours, she was also terminated. Within a month, both Rachel and Kelly had lost their jobs. They were living together in Kelly's condo, burning through Kelly's severance pay and struggling to find new employment in a small town where everyone knew their story. But the best part was yet to come. I'd been documenting everything. Every lie Rachel told the kids, every attempt to manipulate the narrative, every financial irregularity I could find. And I'd discovered something interesting in our joint accounts. Rachel had been siphoning money into a separate account for months, probably planning her exit strategy. The account had nearly $20,000 in it, money that should have been marital assets subject to division. Jim filed an emergency motion to freeze the account and recover the funds. We also filed for sanctions against Rachel for hiding assets during divorce proceedings. "This is good," Jim said. "Very good. The judge is not going to be happy about the hidden account, especially on top of everything else." The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning. I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing my best suit and carrying a folder full of documentation. Rachel and her lawyer were already there, huddled in conversation near the windows. Rachel looked different. Thinner, older, like the stress was eating her alive. She avoided eye contact when I walked past. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Chen, was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every trick in the book. "This is a motion to recover hidden assets and for sanctions against the respondent," Judge Chen said, reading from her notes. "Mr. Miller, you allege that your wife concealed marital assets during divorce proceedings?" Jim stood up. "That's correct, Your Honor. We have documentation showing Mrs. Miller transferred nearly $20,000 from joint accounts to a separate account without her husband's knowledge. This was done while she was conducting extramarital affairs and spending marital assets on those affairs." Rachel's lawyer, a tired-looking man named David Reeves, tried to argue that Rachel was simply protecting herself financially. Judge Chen wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Miller, did you open a separate bank account and transfer marital funds to that account without your husband's knowledge?" Rachel stood up slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And did you do this while conducting extramarital affairs?" "Your Honor, my client's personal relationships aren't relevant to the financial—" "I'll determine what's relevant, Mr. Reeves." "Mrs. Miller, please answer the question." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Chen looked at the documentation for several minutes. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the scratching of the court reporter's machine. "Mrs. Miller, you've admitted to conducting extramarital affairs, spending marital assets on those affairs, hiding additional marital assets in secret accounts, and lying to your spouse about your activities for months. Is that an accurate summary?" "Your Honor." "Yes or no, Mrs. Miller?" "Yes." "Mr. Miller, what are you seeking in terms of asset division and custody?" I stood up. "Your Honor, I'm seeking primary custody of our children and an equitable division of assets that takes into account my wife's misuse of marital funds and deception." Judge Chen made some notes, then looked up at both parties. "I'm granting Mr. Miller's motion to recover the hidden assets. Mrs. Miller, you will transfer the full amount back to the marital accounts within 30 days. I'm also awarding Mr. Miller 70% of the marital assets, given the evidence of financial misconduct." Rachel's face went white. "As for custody, I'm awarding primary physical custody to Mr. Miller, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Miller until she can demonstrate stability and honesty in her relationships with the children. "Your Honor," David Reeves said, "that seems excessive. Mr. Reeves, your client has been lying to her children about her whereabouts and activities for months. She's been conducting multiple affairs while married and has demonstrated a pattern of deception and financial irresponsibility. I'm not going to reward that behavior with equal custody." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Outside, Rachel was crying in the hallway while Kelly tried to comfort her. They'd lost everything, their jobs, their money, their reputations, and now the kids. I walked past them without a word, but I could hear Rachel calling my name. "Dan, please, we need to talk." I stopped and turned around. "About what?" "About the kids, about visitation, about working something out." "The judge worked it out. Supervised visitation. Follow the court order." "Dan, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still their mother. You should have thought about that before you decided to screw my boss in hotel rooms." Kelly stepped forward. "You don't have to be cruel about it." I looked at her, the woman who'd helped orchestrate the destruction of my marriage, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Cruel? You want to see cruel? You both lied to my children for months. You made them accomplices in your deception. You stole money from their college funds to pay for hotel rooms and jewelry. And now you want to lecture me about cruelty?" "We never meant," Kelly started. "You never meant to get caught. There's a difference." I walked away and didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear Rachel sobbing and Kelly trying to calm her down. But that wasn't my problem anymore. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. The kids were adjusting to the custody arrangement better than I'd expected. Ellie had come around once she realized how much her mother had been lying to all of us. Max was thriving with the stability and honesty. Rachel's supervised visits were awkward and infrequent. She'd moved 2 towns over and was working at a call center, trying to rebuild her life. Kelly had moved back in with her parents and was looking for work in another state. Greg had lost 2 of his 3 dealerships and was facing multiple lawsuits from business partners and creditors. My business was doing better than ever. Word had gotten out about how I'd handled the situation, and I was getting referrals from people who respected the way I'd fought for my family. Tommy had stepped up and was basically running the day-to-day operations while I focused on growing the business. "You know what I respect about you?" Tommy said one afternoon while we were closing up the shop. "You didn't just get mad, you got even. And you did it legal and smart." "I had good help," I said, thinking about Jim's legal advice and Susan's photographic evidence. "Still, most guys would have just punched somebody and ended up in jail. You destroyed them without throwing a single punch." He was right. Greg, Rachel, and Kelly had all lost everything that mattered to them, their jobs, their reputations, their financial security, and I'd done it all within the legal system using their own actions against them. That evening, I was having dinner with the kids when Ellie brought up something that surprised me. "Dad, I want to apologize for how I acted when this all started." I looked up from my spaghetti. "What do you mean?" "I blamed you for not fighting for the marriage. I thought you should have tried harder. But I understand now that Mom had already checked out. She was living a completely different life." "You don't need to apologize, Ellie. You were trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Still, I should have trusted you. You've never lied to us." Max nodded. "Mom's visits are weird now. She keeps asking about you and whether you're dating anyone. It's like she's jealous or something." "Your mother's dealing with the consequences of her choices," I said. "That's not your responsibility." "Are you dating anyone?" Ellie asked. "Not yet. I'm focused on you guys and the business right now." But the truth was, I was starting to think about it. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The constant tension and uncertainty were gone. I knew who I was and what I wanted. A few weeks later, I ran into Susan at the grocery store. She was out of her nurse's uniform, wearing jeans and a sweater, looking younger and more relaxed than she had at the hotel bar. "Dan Miller," she said, smiling. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected. Thanks to you, actually. Those photos made all the difference in court. I'm glad they helped. I heard about the custody ruling. That must be a relief." "It is. The kids are doing well and we're all moving forward." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, but there was something comfortable about the conversation. Susan was direct and honest, qualities I'd learned to value highly. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I asked before I could talk myself out of it. I'd like that, she said. We exchanged numbers, and I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. That night, I was sitting on my back porch with a beer, watching the sunset and thinking about how much my life had changed in less than a year. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dan, it's Rachel. I know I'm not supposed to contact you directly, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I know I destroyed our family, and I know you'll probably never forgive me. But I want you to know that I regret everything. I hope you can find happiness. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Rachel had made her choices, and now she was living with them. I had made mine, and I was living with them too. The difference was, I could sleep at night. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Susan. Thanks for asking me to coffee. I'm looking forward to it. I smiled and typed back, me too. Then I finished my beer and went inside to help Max with his homework. It was a school night, and we had a routine to maintain. For the first time in a long time, that routine felt like something worth protecting. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I thought the drama was over. I was wrong. It started with a call from Ellie's school. She'd been in a fight with another student and needed to be picked up immediately. When I arrived at the principal's office, Ellie was sitting in a chair with a split lip and fire in her eyes. What happened? I asked. Madison Cooper was saying things about you and Mom, Ellie said. Lies about how you drove Mom away and how you're a controlling psycho who destroyed her life. Madison Cooper. Her mother was friends with Kelly's family, part of the social circle that had chosen Rachel's side in the divorce. Ellie, you can't get in fights over gossip, I said. It wasn't gossip, Dad. She said Mom told her mother that you threatened to kill her if she didn't give you custody. She said you're dangerous and that people should stay away from you. My blood ran cold. Rachel was spreading lies about me being violent, trying to rehabilitate her own image by painting me as an abuser. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, was sympathetic but firm. Mr. Miller, I understand this is a difficult situation, but Ellie can't resolve family issues with violence. I understand. It won't happen again. On the drive home, Ellie was quiet until we pulled into our driveway. Dad, you never threatened Mom, did you? No, Ellie. I never threatened your mother or anyone else. I used the legal system to protect our family and our assets. That's all. Then why is she saying you did? Because she's trying to make herself look like a victim instead of someone who made bad choices. That evening, I called Jim and told him about the rumors Rachel was spreading. That's defamation, he said immediately. And it could affect the custody arrangement if she's claiming you're violent. What can we do about it? Document everything. Get statements from people who've heard these rumors. If we can prove she's spreading false allegations about domestic violence, we can go back to court. I started making calls. Tommy had heard the rumors at the coffee shop. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, had been approached by one of Kelly's relatives asking if she'd ever seen signs of abuse. Even my mechanic friend Joe had been asked questions about my temper and whether I'd ever been violent. The rumors were spreading systematically like a coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation. I was documenting everything when my phone rang. It was Susan. Dan, I heard something at the hospital today that I think you should know about. What's that? One of the nurses who lives near Kelly's family said, Rachel and Kelly have been telling people you have anger management issues and that you threatened Rachel during the divorce. They're saying you forced her to give up custody by intimidating her. That's completely false. I know, but they're being very specific about it. They're saying you have a history of controlling behavior and that Rachel was afraid to fight the custody ruling because she thought you might hurt her. This was worse than I'd thought. Rachel and Kelly weren't just spreading general rumors. They were building a specific narrative about domestic abuse. There's something else, Susan said. I heard they're planning to petition the court to modify the custody arrangement. They're going to claim Rachel was coerced into accepting the current terms because she feared for her safety. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. After everything we'd been through, Rachel was going to try to get the kids back by claiming I was abusive. Can they do that? If they can convince a judge that the original ruling was made under duress, maybe. But Dan, anyone who knows you knows these allegations are ridiculous. The problem is, not everyone knows me. And in a small town, rumors like this can take on a life of their own. I called Jim immediately and told him what Susan had learned. We need to get ahead of this, he said. If they're planning to file a motion to modify custody, we need to be ready with our own evidence. What kind of evidence? Character witnesses? Documentation of your relationship with the kids. Evidence that Rachel's allegations are false and motivated by revenge. How do we prove a negative? How do I prove I never threatened her? We start with the fact that she never mentioned any threats during the original proceedings. If you were really threatening her, why didn't she bring it up then? Why didn't she ask for a restraining order? Why did she agree to supervised visitation instead of fighting for her rights? Jim was right. Rachel's current allegations didn't match her behavior during the divorce. If she'd really been afraid of me, she would have said something to the judge. Over the next week, I gathered character references from everyone I could think of. Tommy wrote a statement about my temperament and professionalism. Mrs. Henderson from the school wrote about my interactions during parent conferences. Even some of my customers provided references about my character and demeanor. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. I needed to confront Rachel directly and get her to admit that her allegations were false. I called Kelly's number, knowing Rachel would probably answer. Hello? Rachel's voice was cautious. Rachel, it's Dan. We need to talk. I don't think that's a good idea. You're spreading lies about me threatening you. That needs to stop. I'm not spreading lies. I'm telling people the truth about what it was like being married to you. What truth? That I worked hard to support our family? That I trusted you when you were lying to my face? That I used the legal system instead of violence when I discovered your affairs? You intimidated me, Dan. You made me feel like I had no choice but to give up custody. Bullshit. You gave up custody because you were more interested in your affairs than in being a mother. You chose Greg and Kelly over your own children. That's not true. Then why didn't you fight for custody? Why didn't you tell the judge I was threatening you? Why didn't you ask for a restraining order? Rachel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less confident. Because I knew I'd screwed up. I knew I'd hurt you and the kids. So you're admitting you weren't afraid of me? I was afraid of what you might do. What I might do? Rachel, the worst thing I did was hire a good lawyer and document your affairs. I never raised my voice to you, never threatened you, never did anything but protect my children from the chaos you created. You destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy the kids' lives too. I hung up and immediately called Jim to tell him about the conversation. Did you record it? He asked. No, but I think I rattled her. She admitted she wasn't really afraid of me, just afraid of the consequences of her actions. That's good. If she files this motion, we'll be ready. 2 weeks later, Rachel and Kelly did exactly what Susan had predicted. They filed a motion to modify custody, claiming that Rachel had been coerced into accepting the original arrangement due to fear of domestic violence. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning, exactly 1 year after I'd first discovered Rachel at the hotel. This time, I was ready for war. The courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Rachel and Kelly sat with their lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Patricia Wells, who specialized in domestic violence cases. On my side, Jim had arranged for several character witnesses to attend, including Tommy, Mrs. Henderson, and even Susan. Judge Chen called the court to order and reviewed the motion. Mrs. Miller, you're claiming that your ex-husband threatened you during divorce proceedings and that you agreed to the current custody arrangement under duress? Rachel stood up, looking nervous but determined. Yes, Your Honor. Dan has anger management issues and a history of controlling behavior. I was afraid that if I fought for custody, he might become violent. Can you provide specific examples of threats or violent behavior? Rachel's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, domestic abuse often involves subtle intimidation rather than overt threats. My client was psychologically coerced into accepting an unfavorable custody arrangement. Judge Chen looked skeptical. Mrs. Miller, during the original proceedings, did you mention any threats or intimidation to this court? No, Your Honor. Did you request a restraining order? No, Your Honor. Did you ask for police protection or document any threatening behavior? No, Your Honor, but... Mrs. Miller, you're asking me to believe that you were so afraid of your husband that you gave up custody of your children, but not so afraid that you felt the need to involve law enforcement or mention these fears to the court. Rachel's confidence was starting to crack. I was confused and scared. I wasn't thinking clearly. Mr. Miller, Judge Chen said, turning to me, do you have any response to these allegations? I stood up. Your Honor, these allegations are completely false and are being made in retaliation for the consequences of Mrs. Miller's own actions. I have character witnesses and evidence that contradicts every aspect of her claims. Jim called Tommy to the stand first. Tommy was nervous but clear in his testimony. I've worked for Dan Miller for 3 years, he said. I've never seen him lose his temper or raise his voice to anyone. He's the most even-tempered person I know. Have you ever seen him interact with his wife? Jim asked. Many times. She came to the shop regularly. Dan was always respectful and patient with her, even when she was difficult. Difficult how? She would criticize his work, complain about money, make comments about him being dirty or uneducated. Dan never responded with anger. He just took it. Mrs. Henderson testified about my interactions at school events and parent conferences. Mr. Miller has always been professional and appropriate in all his dealings with school staff and other parents. I've never seen any indication of anger management issues or controlling behavior. Susan's testimony was the most powerful. As a nurse, she had training in recognizing signs of domestic abuse, and she'd observed my behavior during one of the most stressful periods of my life. I met Mr. Miller when he was discovering his wife's affair, she testified. He was clearly hurt and angry about the situation, but his anger was focused on the betrayal, not on intimidating or controlling anyone. He was methodical and rational in gathering evidence and protecting his interests. Did you ever see him interact with his wife? Jim asked. Yes, I observed them together at the hotel. Even when confronting her about the affair, Mr. Miller remained calm and controlled. He didn't raise his voice or make any threatening gestures. When it was Patricia Wells's turn to cross-examine, she tried to suggest that I'd been manipulative and controlling in subtle ways. Mr. Miller, isn't it true that you hired a private investigator to spy on your wife? No, that's not true. I followed her myself on one occasion and was provided with photographs by a witness who observed the affair. Isn't it true that you deliberately destroyed your wife's career by reporting her to her employer? I reported violations of company policy that I observed. The company made their own decisions about consequences. Isn't it true that you used your knowledge of the affair to intimidate your wife into accepting an unfavorable custody arrangement? No. I used evidence of her affairs and financial misconduct to ensure that the court had accurate information when making custody decisions. Patricia Wells was good, but she didn't have any actual evidence of threats or intimidation. Everything she presented was speculation and interpretation. When Rachel took the stand, Jim's cross-examination was devastating. Mrs. Miller, you claim you were afraid of your husband, but you continued living in the same house with him for weeks after he discovered your affair. Is that correct? Yes, but... And during that time, did he ever threaten you physically? Not directly, but did he ever raise his hand to you? No. Did he ever prevent you from leaving the house? No. Did he ever monitor your communications or restrict your activities? No. In fact, Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you continued seeing your affair partners even after your husband discovered the relationships? Rachel's face flushed. I don't know what you mean. Isn't it true that you continued meeting with Greg Marsh and Kelly Simmons after your husband confronted you about the affairs? We were just talking. Just talking at hotels? We were trying to figure out what to do. What to do about what? About getting caught? About the situation. Jim pulled out a hotel receipt dated 2 weeks after our kitchen table confrontation. Mrs. Miller, this is a receipt from the Lakeview Inn, dated 2 weeks after your husband discovered your affair. The room was paid for by Greg Marsh. Were you just talking in a hotel room? Rachel's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Rachel had been caught in another lie. Mrs. Miller, Jim continued, if you were truly afraid of your husband, why didn't you move out of the family home immediately? I didn't have anywhere to go. But you moved in with Kelly Simmons after the divorce proceedings began. Why didn't you move in with her earlier if you were afraid? I was trying to save my marriage. By continuing your affairs? I was confused. Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you're making these allegations now because you regret losing custody and are trying to find a way to reverse the court's decision? No, that's not. Isn't it true that you and Kelly Simmons have been spreading rumors about your ex-husband being violent in an attempt to damage his reputation? We've been telling people the truth. What truth? You've admitted under oath that he never threatened you, never hit you, never prevented you from leaving. What truth are you telling people? Rachel sobbed on the stand, claiming I'd humiliated her and turned our children against her. By presenting evidence of your public affairs, by making everything public. Your affairs already were public. He merely documented them. Recess revealed Rachel and Kelly panicking. Their strategy had collapsed. Judge Chen ruled allegations baseless, retaliatory. False claims referred for perjury investigation. Rachel's visitation reduced to monthly supervised sessions pending counseling. Outside, Rachel begged forgiveness. You threw away our family, I said, then tried to destroy me with lies. Now live with the consequences. 6 months later, I married Susan. The kids thrived. Rachel and Kelly vanished. Greg's empire crumbled. Our home became peaceful, honest. The best revenge? Living well.